What will happen is Wendy will read out what the declarations are and then just check that it's right. What should come over there? Sorry, Councillor Bailey.
So for each one it's got two, a 1 and a 2.
Just in case you've got more than one.
Yeah, I had 5 the other day.
I could have put 3 or 4, but they want the space.
Okay, well, while we're passing that around, there's no fire drill alarm anticipated today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave the building through the nearest fire exit by following the signs above the doors. Make your way to the rear of the car park and wait there until you're told it's safe to return. This is a smoke-free building. If you wish to smoke, there's a smoking shelter at the rear of the car park alongside the building. Toilets are available in the stairwell of the building at each floor landing, and water is available in reception. And please make sure all phones are muted or switched off. Okay, and the really important announcement is we have no lunch ordered today, so we are aiming to finish by 1 o'clock.
Yeah. No.
At the latest. Okay. Have we got the sheet back yet?
Yes.
No. We have. Brilliant.
It's all good.
Right, good morning then, and welcome to this Strategic Planning Committee meeting on Tuesday the 3rd of October 2023. I'm your chair, Councillor Ollie Davey. To my left is Vice Chair Mike Howe. Supporting officers present are Ed Freeman, Assistant Director Planning Strategy and Development Management, Damien Hunter, Planning Solicitor, and Wendy Harris, Democratic Services Officer. Can I remind everyone present, the meeting is audio recorded for subsequent publication on the Council's website. So all members and officers making a contribution to the meeting, please use a microphone, or your comments will not be recorded. So we'll start with the roll call. Wendy.
Thanks, Chair. So I'll start with yourself, Councillor Davey.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Howe, Vice Chair.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Bailey.
Present, Wendy.
Thank you. Councillor Jess Bailey.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fernley.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hartnell.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward. We got no. Councillor Ingham.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Levine.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Olive.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Parr.
Present.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And we have some apologies.
Yes, I've just got 2 apologies. Councillor Dan Ledger and Councillor Kevin Blakey. So whether Councillor Hayward's coming later, I'm not quite sure. Or whether...
Oh, right.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Agenda item 2 is the minutes, which are on page 3 to 14 of your agenda. Does anybody have any comments or issues with the minutes? In that case, I will vote them as a true and accurate record. If everybody could show their approval.
Sorry, I'm abstaining.
Anyone against approving those minutes? No, that's fine. Okay, so you were abstaining, Councillor?
Halfway through the agenda.
Ah, right. Okay. Right. Item 3 then, declarations of interest. So when
There are
you're going,
none.
we haven't got any.
No.
Righto. That's nice and easy. Item 4, public speaking. I don't see any
We have
public
none.
speakers. No. Item 5, matters of urgency. There are none. Agenda item 6, any Part B items or agree any items to be dealt with after the public have been excluded. There are none. So we move on to agenda item 7, the housing monitoring update to the year ending 31st of March 2023. It's pages 15 to 71. So, Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. So members, long-standing members of the committee will be familiar with the format of this report. We produce these every year as a housing monitoring update report, which considers housing completions during the monitoring year and looks ahead in terms of projections for the following 5 years in terms of our 5-year land supply position. So fundamentally, the government have two tests. There's the 5-year land supply requirement and also the housing delivery test, so the housing delivery test is sort of looking backwards over what's been delivered, and the 5-year housing land supply is looking forward in terms of projected delivery over the coming 5 years. So just turning quickly to some of the headlines from the report. In terms of delivery and completions, you'll see that the number of homes completed, we estimate, subject to DLUC taking account of the net gain of 67 care home bedrooms rather. We estimate completions at 998 homes between April 22 and March 23. That's a slight drop on the previous year, which is at 1,039, but is still in excess of the 910 homes we're required to deliver under the standard method. In terms of completions, it's worth noting at this point in terms of the housing delivery test, which, as I say, is the test that looks backwards over completions, we have consistently met the requirements of the housing delivery test since its inception in 2015-16, but we don't have the results of the latest housing delivery test, which were expected to be published at the end of last year or early this year, but have yet to be issued, but we fully expect that we have complied with that once again. Turning to the 5-year housing land supply position, then, as I say, this is now measured against the annual requirement of 910 homes per year, this having been reduced earlier this year due to changes in the affordability ratio, which has reduced that from 946 homes per year down to 910. However, despite that and a number of consents having been issued over the last year, the housing land supply position, taking into account a 5% buffer position that we're required to under government guidance, now stands at 4.28 years supply, down from 4.68 years previously, which I think is probably a disappointing position, given particularly those members on planning committee would have seen the number of applications that have been granted during that period, partly to help to bolster supply with the application of the tilted balance that we need to apply in these circumstances. The report considers the reasons for this, and there are a number of them. I'll just draw out some of the main ones. One of these is that we've been keeping track of planning appeal decisions over the last year, and inspectors seem to be taking a more and more strict approach to applying the guidance in planning practice guidance about the requirements for clear evidence of deliverability of sites, particularly those sites where there's only outline planning permission and therefore they don't actually have full planning permission to implement. So the requirements about the level of information we should have, an assurance that the sites will be delivered, and in circumstances where we have insufficient evidence to demonstrate that any objections to those applications will be overcome, we've had to take those out of the assessment to ensure that it's robust and complies with current practice at planning appeals. So that's had some impact in terms of the number of homes within the 5-year projections. Other key factors include the slowdown in build rates and sales, which we've seen in East Devon and I think nationally due to current economic climate and housing market conditions. We've also unfortunately seen some developers going into administration in the district, which has led to work ceasing on those sites and uncertainty over when and how those sites will be completed. It's also worth noting that obviously this 5-year period is constantly moving forward, so as homes are delivered on a site, they fall out of that equation and the whole calculation shifts forward another year. So with high numbers of dwellings being completed, obviously those fall out of the projections for future delivery. We've also seen a number of applications expire, so that were in the 5-year calculation, haven't been implemented, have expired and therefore dropped out of that. So a number of factors. There's a couple of others mentioned as well at the bottom of page 19 and the top of page 20. But fundamentally, those are the main issues that have impacted on that. I would, however, say if we hadn't consented all of the things that have been consented over the last year, the figures would be a lot worse. We'd be down at about 3.2 years. So we have certainly slowed the decline in terms of the housing land supply position. And there's quite a number of sites that are affected that I think with greater certainty over the coming year hopefully can go into the calculations and improve the position. But as things stand, we think we have a sort of robust and defendable 4.28 years supply. In terms of what that means, we think that means in terms of planning inspectors' consideration of these issues that would be termed a significant shortfall. The inspectors seem to have a grading scale of how worse people's 5-year housing land supply position is. So I think we've gone from into having a significant shortfall, but not a severe shortfall on the sliding scale that seems to be applied. I don't think that makes a huge amount of difference in our case, but in making decisions on planning applications, we as officers and members of planning committee need to be mindful of the extent of the supply shortfall in terms of the tilted balance and how much weight is given to the housing land supply position. So it would suggest that more weight should be given to those issues in decision making to help to address the situation. The other thing I think to note from the report is the implications of that. So clearly one of the implications is the application of the tilted balance and needing to give greater weight to housing and supply positions. But as is noted in paragraph 3.9 in the report, there are a number of protected areas of the district where habitat implications, areas of outstanding natural beauty apply, where a greater level of protection is provided in terms of presumption in favour of sustainable development, and also neighbourhood plans. So in certain circumstances, neighbourhood plans that are less than 2 years old, the guidance talks about the presumption applying to applications. So I'm just reading the application implications in terms of neighbourhood plans. Means that usually if the plan is less than 2 years old and is meeting its housing requirements, then the presumption is that neighbourhood plan should take much greater weight in the sense that it's an up-to-date policy for the application to be considered against. So there's a small number of neighbourhood plans in the district that are in that position and offering a little bit more protection to those locations. So fundamentally that's the position. I won't go into the huge amount of detail that's obviously in the report and the technical details, but happy to take questions on that. So just turning to, one last thing to note actually is I did a little bit of research and looking online it would appear that the current position nationally is that 39% of English local authorities are unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. So we're far from alone in not having a 5-year housing land supply, with 39% of authorities in that position, English authorities that is. So just turning to the recommendations then, you'll see there's 4 recommendations before you today. The first is to note the district 5-year housing land supply position and the potential risks and implications of that as detailed in section 5 of the report. 2, to note the residential dwellings completion data and future forecasts. 3, to note that the Housing Monitoring Update 2023 will be published on the Council's website as part of the Authority Monitoring Report. And 4, to delegate publication of the audit trail document. So I should have said behind all of this is an audit trail document for each site in terms of where we've evidenced the projected delivery rates, what that's all based on. So this will be a document of hundreds of pages of background information to all of this that we now need to produce to evidence the position and that can be relied on in circumstances of an appeal. So there's a huge amount of work that goes into all of that. We haven't completed that document. I thought it was important to bring the headlines and the report to members so that can inform future decision making. But we hope to complete that shortly and publish that on the website by the end of the month. So I make those recommendations to the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ed. And it's not good news, but no doubt members. Actually, thank you, Jeff. I'll ask you in a moment. I just had one question, Ed. You mentioned that some sites that had been granted planning permission have not then subsequently been delivered. And I wondered if any of those, firstly, were significant sites in terms of the numbers, and also if there was any kind of common theme of why those weren't delivered.
Through you, Chair, I don't know off the top of my head exactly which sites. I don't think they tend to be the larger sites. Can't think of any of the major sites in the Growth Point area and enterprise zone, for example, that are affected by that. I think they tend to be smaller scale sites, but they all have an impact overall. Certainly that's information and detail that would be in the audit trail report that we're pulling together and we'll publish later in the month.
Thank you, Ed. Okay, we'll go to speakers then. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. At the moment, in planning terms, our local plan is out of date as we cannot demonstrate a 5-year land supply. Therefore, planning applications brought forward from developers that are not included in the local plan and are not compliant are probably going to be agreed. And these are known as windfall sites. Windfall sites last year totalled 341. In my ward alone, I've got over 250 dwellings going through planning at the moment. All of those would be considered to be windfall sites. But you calculate an average, looking back 5 years, of windfall sites of 138 over the next 5 years. Even if all those houses in my ward are allowed, the 5-year land figure will not alter because they're included in the windfall sites. So I wonder if we could look at how we treat windfall sites as the figure has accelerated dramatically because of these non-compliant sites coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Good question. Ed, do you want to come back, or shall we take a few?
Take a few.
Yeah. Okay, keeping outside the committee then, Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions. First one is on the River Axe phosphate levels. If that was to be removed, and the ones that you say you've removed, would that help our 5-year land supply? Would that tip us into having a 5-year land supply if those houses were allowed? And secondly, on affordable completions, we are told that we are getting near 25% in Cranbrook when we deliver affordable houses. But the figures you've given, that there are 114 affordable houses delivered in 22-23, doesn't seem to stack up there. According to my calculations, that's just under 12%, depending on whether you take 961 or 988 houses completed, nowhere near 20 or 25%. What's correct? Are we delivering nearly 25% of houses in Cranbrook or anywhere else in the group, otherwise in the area, or is that it? We are just delivering less than 12% of affordable houses when we build them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Staying outside the committee, Councillor Rickson.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I believe that the government housing delivery test is flawed. For example, number one, vacancy rates for skilled construction workers are up 65%, comparing November to January 23 versus January-March 2020. And this figure is from a government report dated March 23 on labour shortages in the construction and hospitality sectors. Number two, phosphate pollution is 70% attributable to the farming industry in our district. This is curtailing planning decisions in the Axe Valley, leading to reduced delivery rates. Number three, the government algorithm. This penalises councils which have previously delivered high rates of house building. For example, East Devon, which has delivered twice the rate of Mid Devon. It doesn't take a genius to work out that our district will be built out way before Mid Devon due to this method of calculation. Neither the lack of skilled labour nor phosphate pollution are within our control, yet we are penalised by this government algorithm, which further disadvantages our district. Furthermore, due to high rates of interest, which themselves have led to mortgages becoming increasingly unaffordable, it probably suits the building industry to slow down the rate of delivery in order to keep house prices high. And despite the number of houses delivered, social rent housing is in short supply, whilst this is the most urgently needed housing in our district. With reference to 2.33 in the Housing Monitoring Update, during 22-23, only 27 properties were delivered for social rent out of a grand total of 986, i.e. 2.7%, which is a derisory percentage compared with local need, particularly as wages are not high and affordable homes are not affordable to those on local incomes. The average salary apparently in Devon is about £27,702 per annum. That's £2,300 per month before tax, cost of living, etc. And the average rent is £824. So using the average rent figure, nearly £10,000 is being paid annually out of income. Social rent housing does not deliver the profits developers seek, and a recent government proposal to extend the right to buy scheme to housing association tenants may lead them to feel that their assets are being expropriated if they are forced to sell at a steep discount to value. It won't give them enough capital to replace the sold homes with newly built ones. This, of course, is precisely where we have ended up with council housing deliveries since the 1980 Housing Act gave residents the right to buy. Einstein has often been misquoted as saying, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results."
Thank you, Councillor Rickson. We'll come into committee. We had a couple of questions from committee and then I'll go over to Ed. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. What do we do as an authority to remind applicants that their application, their approved application, is about to lapse? Because if we fail to do that, we're actually not helping ourselves, are we, with regards to 5-year land supply? So I'd like to hear what we do in a rolling year to secure the sustained 5-year land supply.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you. A question for Mr. Freeman. Can you clarify how the lower housing land supply figures and the presumption in favour of sustainable development is going to affect the property applications in the AONBs, which are supposed to be given a greater level of protection, and especially what happens if there is no neighbourhood plan in that settlement? I have another question, if that's okay, which is, has the pause on the assessment of housing sites in the emerging local plan had any effect on us being in this position where we're unable to meet our housing land supply figures? Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more speakers from committee, Mr. Freeman, we've got quite a list for you there, so please indicate if Mr. Freeman hasn't answered your question.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So if I go back to Councillor Young's question at the start, I mean, in terms of windfalls, the windfall calculations is sites are less than 20 homes in terms of this. So some of the larger sites I think you're referring to, particularly I know there's some applications in at Woodbury at the moment, isn't there, are larger sites than that. So they're not taken account of in that windfall calculation. So if they were granted, they would would come in and be included within the calculation and add to the position over and above the windfall allowance. So yeah, I don't think we need to worry too much about that. It's about bolstering the position overall, whether it's as windfalls or not. In terms of Councillor Barlow's question, in terms of the River Axe impact, I don't think it's having a massive impact. It's slightly complicated by the fact that some of the sites that have applications in that area and are affected by that, there are other issues with. So it depends whether we include those that are only held up because of the nutrient issue or those that would be held up by that, but there are also other issues that we're trying to resolve and trying to work through with developers. I think off the top of my head, from the work we did, that there's only about, I think it was 150 or 160 homes in applications within the River Axe catchment that are held up entirely because of the nutrient issues. There's quite a much larger number in terms of those with other issues. But for example, if you take the Axminster urban extension site, obviously the fact that we can't deliver the relief road to that means that can't come forward. But there is a small part of that, I think for about 100 homes on the southernmost part of that, where there is an application in that could potentially come forward without the relief road, but is held up because of nutrient neutrality issues. So that's 100 of the sort of 150, 160 that are held up. But you could argue it's a lot more than that if we were able to deliver the relief road, the rest of the urban extension. Subject to nutrient neutrality issues could also come forward. So it's not critical in terms of the housing land supply position. It would obviously help to bolster the position, but you'll see from the report the shortfall is 685 dwellings. So we're not talking of a shortfall of that order arising from the nutrient neutrality issues, but it does have an impact. In terms of affordable completions, yes, I mean, I think the complication here is that a lot of smaller sites in the district fall below the threshold for delivering affordable housing. So you have to bear in mind in terms of the total number will never equal of affordable homes will never be 25% of the total, because a proportion of those sites are below the threshold and not required to provide any. So the proportion is always going to be lower than 20-25%. Obviously, some of the larger sites are still subject to viability issues, and so those affordable housing levels have unfortunately been negotiated down on viability grounds as required to do under government guidance. So maybe less than the 25% that the policy would require in most locations anyway. Conversely, you've also got parts of the district where it's 50%, or rural exception sites where it would be 2/3. So it's quite a complicated calculation to work out what should have been delivered had they all complied with policy. But I think if you look at it on a national picture, from what I'm aware of elsewhere, we're doing okay in terms of affordable housing. There are some places where they've had to set policies much lower than that, the 25%. So they're only requiring a lot less than that because of viability issues to start with. And then they're also being driven down due to viability issues, market conditions, small sites. So it's difficult to say, but I think we're doing okay if you look at it compared to others. In terms of Councillor Ingham's comments, what do we need to prevent apps from lapsing? I mean, we don't have a process whereby we write to developers and say, please note your application lapses in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, or whatever, to remind them. There may be all sorts of reasons why applications lapse. I don't think, I mean, it's a contributing factor. I don't think it's a massive factor. I think generally the build-out rates in the district are very good, and the conversion from consents to build-out is very high in East Devon compared to a lot of areas. I know other areas within Greater Exeter, I think particularly I've had conversations with Mid Devon where they struggle to get sites delivered, even where consent is granted. So I don't think it's a big problem. Whether or not there's things we could do about that, it's challenging without understanding the reasons. So perhaps we need to do some further research into that and understand the reasons why those sites haven't come forward and what, if anything, could have been done. But I very much doubt that landowners and developers are are not progressing sites that they could do so. And Councillor Fitzgerald's comments. So yeah, I mean, applications in areas of standing natural beauty. So those national designations, such as areas of outstanding natural beauty, provide an extra level of protection. So in terms of the tilted balance, I wouldn't expect that we would be granting applications on the basis of us not having a 5-year housing land supply if they're in an area of outstanding natural beauty. The designation should obviously be taking priority in those circumstances. Similarly, as I said, in terms of neighbourhood plans, where the particular criteria in the guidance applies in terms of the plan being made less than 2 years ago, it needs to contain policies and allocations to meet its identified housing requirement. That's the main things, actually. I won't go. It's quite a long criteria. But the main things are that the neighbourhood plan needs to be less than 2 years old and contain policies and allocations to meet its identified housing requirement. There's a slight complication for some of ours in terms of whether or not there was an identified housing requirement, because our position in the adopted local plan is that neighbourhood plans don't have to provide housing, and we haven't given out figures. So that's a question mark against some of those. But there's a small number of neighbourhood plans where there's that additional protection. Where the neighbourhood plan's older than that, obviously we have regard to those policies, but they don't benefit from the sort of additional level of protection that's in the guidance. And where there is no neighbourhood plan, obviously we're reliant on the policies within the local plan, but bearing in mind we're applying the tilted balance, they're having lesser weight, and we're having to give more weight to the housing and supply position in consideration of those applications. In terms of impact of delays with the local plan, I mean, really this process works on the basis of consents, and what have we got consent for that we can have certainty to project forward. So the delays in the local plan it itself don't have an immediate impact, but in the longer term, the further we can progress the local plan, have allocations in a made local plan, then those applications coming forward, the more we're bolstering our housing and supply position, and the better the position looks. So progressing the local plan is more about the longer term actions to address this situation. Shorter term actions are about granting consents fundamentally and getting those consents in the system to bolster the supply position more quickly. Hopefully that picks up on all of the main points, Chair.
Well done, Ed. Right, we've got a few people coming round again. Councillor Barlow, you want a second go?
Thank you very much. Just very quickly to Ed, we're 600 and something houses missing now off the 5-year hand supply. We've delivered 900 and something this year, likely to do similar next year. Are we ever likely to catch up and have a valid 5-year housing supply, or is it just pie in the sky?
Okay, I've got a couple more questions for you, Ed, and then Councillor Young.
Yeah, coming back on what Ed said about windfalls, I'm very confused, because I've been told that the sites that are coming forward would be considered to be windfall sites. The one in Lympston I've been told that's going to be considered to be a windfall site, but I'm now told that they're not windfall sites. Last year we built out 341 windfall sites, and the average that we considered to come forward each year is 138. So that's well over twice. So when is a windfall not a windfall, and when is a windfall a windfall? I'm confused. And if you look at 3.21 of the report, the adjusted windfall allowance is still a conservative estimate. That's a little c, by the way. In reality, larger windfall sites will on occasion come forward for development, as will small garden sites, but these have not been included in these adjusted windfall projections. So what has been included in these windfall projections? Because I don't believe that 138 windfall sites for the next 5 years per year is appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Young. I'll ask Ed to come back on that one after one more speaker. Councillor Levine.
got a couple of technical questions, but I really want to start with the declaration of ignorance. I don't understand section 3.9. Members will be aware. I'm not. So would you be able to explain it to me? And the other thing that I was looking at is section 5. We start talking that suddenly we're going to subdivide East Devon into the West End and the rest of Devon. And there's a great inequality in the number of, in the 5-year, in the supply of houses. In the West End, we only got 3.73, whereas in the rest of Devon, containing all the AO and Bs, we've got a 5.17-year supply, which means we're either undersupplying in the West or overbuilding in the AO and B areas. And lastly, ignorance again. A very important part in deciding our 5-year supply are the number of adults in households. Now, when I was young, a household consisted of father, mother, and 2.4 children. What is a household now? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, some interesting questions there. We'll go over to Mr. Freeman again to respond to those 3 questions, or 3 speakers.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of Councillor Barlow's point, yes, I think we can get back to having a 5-year housing land supply position. I think it's just notoriously challenging when you fall behind on these things. It takes time to get back. It's not a quick fix. If I think back to the last time we didn't have a 5-year housing land supply, I think it was probably about 3 years, I think, off the top of my head. And it was only really on adoption of the now adopted local plan where we got back to having a 5-year housing land supply position. But once we were there, we maintained that position from 2016 through to last year. It's about the cycle of the plan, whether or not we'll get back to having a 5-year housing land supply position before adoption of the next local plan. It's going to be challenging, I suspect. But as I say, it's about also improving the position and the weight that's given to it. So the better the position, even if it's short of 5 years, the effect it has on the tilted balance and how much weight you give to those issues affects. So I think we have to keep moving forward in trying to improve the housing land supply position, but it's not an easy or quick route back to having it. The other thing to emphasise is the 5 years is a minimum requirement. What we should be trying to do is get well above 5 years and give ourselves some breathing space and some choice in the market in terms of what sites are coming forward. So we shouldn't be aiming to just get to 5 years. We should be aiming to get reasonable distance above 5 years if we can. In terms of Councillor Young's comments, I think there's some confusion in terms of windfalls, in the sense that what we're talking about here is the projections of future windfalls. So yes, we're quite conservative in those projections, because usually windfalls in terms of projections would be those small scale sites in back gardens, the little infill dwellings and things. We are at the moment, because we don't have a 5-year housing land supply, seeing larger scale windfalls coming forward. And obviously those will fall into this, but it's hard to predict what's going to happen in terms of that, because the predictions are based on past trends. So perhaps as time goes on and more of those larger scale windfalls are coming forward, we'd be in a position to predict more accurately what's going to come forward. So yes, I suppose what you're saying is it's a more conservative estimate of windfalls than you'd perhaps like to see, but I think based on evidence of what's happened in the past, it's the best prediction we can give. If it turns out to be better than that, then yes, the position next time will be better than we've currently forecast. But I think experience shows with these things and the risk of challenge on appeal, it's better to be conservative in these estimates than it is to be overly optimistic and then with a lot of public inquiries that we can't win and we can't defend. So I would rather be on the conservative side, or realistically conservative anyway. In terms of Councillor Levine's comments, I think you're referring to paragraph 3.9 in the covering report, where it talks about members will be aware where policies are most important for determining an application out of date. I think the reference is really to paragraph 11 in the NPPF, which talks about what the presumption in favour of sustainable development means fundamentally in terms of decision making. Because what we're saying is, because we don't have a 5-year housing and supply position, the presumption in favour of sustainable development applies. And what that means in terms of the NPPF, at least for decision taking, it says this means approving development proposals that are called with an up-to-date development plan without delay, or as in our case, where there are no relevant development plan policies or the policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date, granting permission unless one of the two applies, the application of policies in the framework, that's the National Planning Policy Framework, that protect areas or assets of particular importance, provides a clear reason for refusing the development proposed. So that comes back to Councillor Fitzgerald's point about the areas of outstanding natural beauty, SSSIs, SACs, those things. Or to any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in this framework taken as a whole. So that's what I was referring to in terms of the tilted balance. The balance is more in favour of granting development to bolster our housing and supply position. But if there are significant adverse impacts that demonstrably outweigh those benefits, then the balance can still lead us to refuse the application despite the housing and supply position. So it's not an open door in terms of developers coming in with residential developments on the basis of bolstering a housing and supply position, but in effect the threshold by which we should be refusing them is higher, basically. And the split between the districts, yeah, I mean, I think it just helps to understand the relationship between the different parts of the district and the supply position. So I think, I can't find the reference directly, but we're effectively slightly above 5 years in the rest of the district, slightly below within the west end of the district. And I think it just helps to illustrate that part of the issue here, I suppose, is delays in supply in the west end of the district. Doesn't mean that we can treat the rest of the district any differently and say, oh, well, the issue's in the west end, therefore we should only be granting consents in the west end to address the situation. Because it's looked at on a district level in terms of the requirements of the guidance and legislation. We've tried that argument in the past. Some long-standing members of the committee may recall. We tried last time we didn't have a 5-year housing and supply to argue that the undersupply was limited to the west end of the district. That didn't wash with inspectors despite our best efforts, and there's still nothing in government guidance that would support that position. But it just helps to understand the geographical implications of that across the district. I think in understanding where the issues arise fundamentally. Does that cover everything, Chair?
Okay. Right. I've got Councillor Olive, Councillor Fitzgerald and Councillor Ingham to come back, and yourself, Mike. Yep. Okay, Councillor Olive.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to talk or ask another question about these windfall sites. I've had a look at the housing monitoring updates for the last 3 or 4 years because I thought those figures would probably be relevant to this conversation. In 2022, we recorded in the 12 months to that report 345 windfall completions, and we're projecting forwards 158 per year over the next 5 years. In 2021, those figures were 337 and 166. In 2020, 391 and 181. And in 2019, 394 and 180. It kind of seems to me that we are systematically underestimating the number of windfalls that are coming forwards. Those figures are what, 50% less on projections than on actuals. So I just wondered if there's a plan to review the way that we calculate those figures, because it seems to me we are unnecessarily disadvantaging ourselves in the 5-year housing land supply calculation on the order of magnitude of 200 odd houses a year, which is, of course, if our shortfall is less than a year, that would cover it. It seems to me. I think there was a question in there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you. The recommendations for the committee are simply to note the report and the risks and implications of the situation that we're in. My question is, what can this committee do to help rectify the situation, to get us back on track, as Councillor Barlow said? Our remit is pretty much the emerging local plan, and as you say, that's a slightly more longer term thing. Is the answer to this question perhaps just get on with it and try and get through the local plan as quickly as you possibly can, because it is frustrating that we're not meeting the targets, and it is frustrating that we are getting so many windfalls, and it is very frustrating that we're not meeting our affordable housing aspirations. So yeah, what can we do? Thank you.
Okay. I think the answer is crack on with the local plan, but I'll let Ed answer that one. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. When Ed's answered those two questions, I'd like to propose the 4 recommendations as printed, that we ratify those.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Fitzgerald. Okay, thank you, Councillor Ingham. Well, we'll go to that in a moment. I'm going to go to Councillor Howe just to speak, and then we'll go to a vote on that unless there are any other members wishing to speak.
Thank you. And obviously we need to get to the crux of Councillor Todd and Councillor Young's question on windfalls. Coming back to the proposal, it is one of those where we're noting this, but the actual people that actually this has relevance to is the planning committee. This is our report, but it doesn't go to the planning committee per se. And I do feel there needs to be a 5th saying what we agree here should be sent to the planning committee as part of their next agenda, so that they can physically see the situation we are in and carry on working in whichever way they need to. And I know we've got a couple of planning committee members. We used to do this routinely. So I hope that seems favour. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just go to Mr. Freeman, because I think there were a few more questions there that haven't been answered yet, and then we'll go to a vote.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, so coming back to Councillor Olive's point with regard to windfalls, I mean, I'm happy to take that away and look at that. It's obviously quite a technical point in terms of the methodology that's used and how that's calculated in terms of windfalls. And I think part of the complication is obviously it's the projections in terms of future windfalls and how conservative we need to be in terms of being tested on that. Obviously, once a windfall site's granted consent, it goes in to the calculation as a consent, and then we're projecting what that site's going to deliver. And so it's much harder to predict what's going to come forward in windfalls in terms of the larger sites, because you don't know necessarily what larger sites are going to come forward, whereas the smaller sites is much easier to predict because we have a record over many years of small infill sites coming forward. Whether or not we can be less conservative on that, I would have to take away and look at the methodology that's used. I think it's part of a shared methodology for the extra housing market area that came through the HELAR process as well. So I'd have to take that away and have a look at that and come back to you. In terms of that, I'm sure we're doing all we can reasonably within the guidance to make sure we present as good a position as we can, but equally a defendable and realistic one at the same time, because we don't want to end up at public inquiries trying to defend figures that we can't defend and simply waste a lot of resources defending the indefensible. So there's a balance to be struck. but happy to take that point away and look into whether or not we've got the balance right in terms of the windfalls. In terms of Councillor Fitzgerald's points, yeah, I mean, I think in terms of this committee, the emphasis needs to be on progressing the local plan and getting that through, submitted for examination and hopefully adopted as quickly as possible, fundamentally because that's our long-term supply position. In terms of the shorter term, it's planning committee and officers where decisions are delegated, applying the tilted balance correctly and giving sufficient weight to these housing and supply positions and trying to bolster the position where appropriate through granting consents.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Mike, I think you were suggesting an additional recommendation, weren't you? That these figures are...
What Mike said to advise us before we decide whether...
Oh, about it going to planning committee?
Yes, I think it does anyway, doesn't it?
Do you want to answer that, Ed?
Do you want to, or do you?
Sorry. Sorry, was the question whether this report goes to planning committee?
Yes, on those decisions, they would be informed of that, sure.
So what we would do when there's an application where the housing and supply position is material consideration and we're applying the tilted balance, we would set out in that report, in that specific application, what the position is. I would suggest probably include a hyperlink to this report, but this report itself doesn't go to them. But where it's relevant, we'll draw it to their attention. So.
Okay. Are you happy with that, Mike? Did you want to add an additional recommendation?
I mean, it's up to the proposer and seconder. I personally feel it should go as a report to committee, not as a sideline. That's the wrong word, but as a mention on planning reports, on planning committee reports. But as I say, it's up to the proposer and seconder. But of course, you've got Councillor Bailey as well, who wants to speak.
Yeah. So your rationale is that if planning committee members are aware of the methodology and the consequences of this, then they're going to be more aware of why we haven't got a 5-year housing land supply rather than feeling they've got it thrust upon them.
Yeah.
Okay. Would the proposer and seconder be happy with?
I would say that fifth item would be...
Microphone, sorry.
That this report is sent to the planning committee and keep it that simple.
Okay. Okay.
Going to take that on?
Yeah, go
Is the
ahead.
seconder happy with that as well? Yeah.
Thank you, Damien. Okay, so we'll add that recommendation that the report in its entirety goes, or a version thereof that clarifies why we have this position, goes to planning committee. Okay, I've got, Councillor Jess Bailey. I'm not ignoring you, Jess. I'm just getting things in the right order here. Okay, off you go.
Thank you. Can I add a sixth recommendation, if the proposer and seconder are happy, that I would like it to be formally requested that Mr. Freeman brings back a report to our next meeting on the issue of windfalls that Councillor Olive has highlighted, because it has been a consistent under calculation of the windfalls, and we do really need to have clarity over why we've been kind of not including all of them, and how we can use those figures to actually potentially reduce our housing targets, or at least take them fully into account. So I'd like to add a sixth recommendation that we call for Mr. Freeman to formally bring back a report to our next strategic planning meeting on windfalls.
Okay.
I'm happy with that, Chair, and just observe not to include it, but that, you know, with any projection, it should be, wherever possible, based on accurate raw data, not presumptions, speculations, or conservative anticipation. It's, you know, the figures were quite clear. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
So I'm quite happy for that to be
Councillor
added.
Fitzgerald, you happy with that sixth recommendation?
Yes.
Okay. Is that feasible, Ed? We can bring a report back on the detailed methodology of the windfalls and how we calculate them, and why we appear to be counting fewer windfalls in future calculations than appear to have been delivered certainly over the last 5 years, as quoted by Councillor Todd.
Through Chair, I mean, I just clarify this. I don't think it's that they're not counted. It's just that the future projections, but they're obviously, once they're consented, they are counted within the calculations. But yeah, certainly happy to take that action away, and we can certainly produce a report to clarify the position and check that that the point that Councillor Olive is making, whether or not that can be done for the next committee, given that the deadline for reports is end of this week, I think. I'll have to look into, but we'll do our best to do it for that timescale. But I can't promise anything.
Yeah, let's just say a future meeting, preferably before the end of the year. Okay, and Councillor Barlow, it's not a debate unless you've come back 3 times, so here we go. No? Oh, you've let me down. I'm sorry. Okay. Right. Okay. I don't know if the next report is going to quite manage 3 from you, but we'll wait in anticipation. Was there anybody else? Have I missed anybody out? Okay. In that case, we now have 6 recommendations. The 4 that are in your report and 2 more, which I'm hoping Damien has some wording for. Go for it, Damien.
Are you ready for me then? So what I've written down in respect to the 5th one, that this report and the decision be reported to the East Devon District Council Planning Committee. And then number 6, that a report in respect of the issues surrounding windfalls be brought to a future strategic planning committee. I know you said preferably before the end of this year, but I was thinking we've already got November and December anyway. Well, we've only got then either next month or the following month. Is that feasible, Ed? Yeah, okay. So on that basis then, are we ready for the vote, Chair?
Yep. Okay, in that case we have those 6 recommendations. We'll take them all together, I think. 3 of them are noting. 1 is delegating the publication to Ed and his team, and then those 2 additional ones on going to the planning committee and further report on the detailed methodology of how we allocate windfalls. Okay, so all in favour?
1, 2, 3. Oh, is that unanimous?
Yeah, I think it's unanimous. Wendy, any against? And any abstentions? No? Thank you very much. Okay, where are we? It's just gone 11 o'clock. Maybe we should have a short comfort break, and we'll reconvene in, what should we say, 10 minutes? That'll be around about 1:15. He's over there. Do we need him back in his seat?
Oh.
He's in the room.
Yeah, it's fine.
He can hear us. Thank you, Ben. Okay, we move on to agenda item 8, then the methodology for the designation of green wedges in the new local plan. So over to, over to Ed to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is seeking members' endorsement of a proposed methodology for defining green wedges in the new local plan. This follows sort of previous discussions that members have had about the need to review green wedges and look at this. This having been an area that we didn't have sufficiently progressed for the consultation on the draft local plan that took place from the end of last year into early this year. So this is one of the issues members will recall from our previous meeting was highlighted as an issue that we would need to do consultation on at the Reg 18 stage, probably next spring, in advance of consultation on a publication draft of the plan, hopefully towards the end of next year. So in terms of this, then it's quite a brief sort of report just highlighting the process that we're intending to go through in terms of that assessment. So if I just quickly talk you through the assessment methodology, obviously the starting point is sort of identifying areas of search, and obviously the starting point is those areas that are identified in the current local plan as existing green wedges, which are highlighted in paragraph 2.2.1 of the assessment methodology. Then in terms of looking at additional, in fact, in looking at those areas, we're highlighting that we have obviously some allocations or recommended allocations in the draft plan were located within some of those existing green wedge areas. So we're just highlighting that we've had regard to the issues of settlement coalescence in assessing those sites and concluded that they would not be significantly harmful to those issues. And so we're not proposing to look at those sites again. So the intention would be that they be excluded from the areas to be assessed as green wedges based on our previous assessment work. So I highlight that as an issue for members to be aware of. In addition, we're then looking potentially at any new green wedges around settlements in the hierarchy, the settlement hierarchy that's previously been agreed by members, and other major allocations not adjacent to these settlements. So we would obviously be looking at potential opportunities for additional green wedges. We would, however, highlight that obviously the local plan looks at an additional new settlement in East Devon. We don't think, from what we've done so far, that it would necessarily be appropriate to identify green wedges around the proposed new settlement at this stage. We think we need ultimately members haven't made a decision about which of the three options they wish to pursue at this stage. But in any event, I would hope that through master planning of any new settlement, we can try and minimise the risk of future settlement coalescence through how we design and lay out the settlement. So obviously there'll have to be areas of informal open space. There will have to be SANGs, suitable alternative natural green spaces, obviously sports pitches, etc. Through appropriate master planning of the area, those areas could be located in areas that are potentially the closest to the neighbouring communities to help to address potential future settlement coalescence without necessarily needing a green wedge. But in any event, obviously through this local plan we're only looking to allocate the first 2,500 homes, and it could be another 10 years before ground is even broken on that. So there would be an opportunity in the first review of the plan to look at potentially designating green wedges around those new settlement areas at that point, once we master plan the area and have a greater understanding of the risks and the issues. So that's what we're proposing in terms of any green wedge in terms of the new settlement. The methodology then goes through a series of stages, including desk-based assessment and research. Site visits, wasn't particularly going to highlight anything on those, but I would highlight in terms of stage 4 and the assessment criteria that there's really two key purposes we've identified for green wedges, these being to prevent the coalescence of settlements and to maintain a sense of place and identity for communities. And we're proposing to assess potential green wedge locations against those criteria, and you'll see that there's a sort of strength criteria that's been identified for each of those criteria, and then we've identified the evidence we'd be looking to gather to support our assessment in terms of those. So a relatively subjective judgment, I think, given the nature of green wedges, but hopefully through using this methodology we can try and take a consistent approach, which is ultimately the purpose of this, is to hopefully get members' agreement to this approach, so that we can ensure that we're doing that work in accordance with members' wishes, have a consistent approach, and that can follow through when we would bring the proposed green wedges to members, hopefully early next year. So you'll see there's two recommendations in the report. The first is asking members to endorse the proposed methodology for defining green wedges as set out in Appendix 1 of the report, and its use in the preparation of green wedge boundaries for consultation purposes. And then two, to agree that the proposed green wedges be brought to committee in early 2024 for members' consideration. That would of course be in advance of any consultation taking place as part of the additional Regulation 18 consultation mentioned last time that we would envisage undertaking next spring. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Personally, I think this is putting the we've put the cart before the horse, because we've looked at development, and now we're looking at the green spaces. We should have looked at the green spaces first, and then decided where the housing would go. But I've been told time and time again, no, we have to do it the other way around. But never mind. But what are green wedges? And as Ed described, it's not just a sort of a no-go area for any building, but it can be used for agriculture, horses, sangs areas, woodlands, nature corridors, sports areas, and all of that needs to be considered when we're looking at green wedges. But the main reason why we have green wedges is to not to allow a specific town or village become part of another town or village. We need some sort of segregation. Therefore, I'm just wondering what sort of consultations we're going to have on this, and are the parishes going to be considered? Are their views going to be considered? And obviously parishes and towns, how they would feel. It's fine in a lot of areas because they're protected by the ANOBs, a lot of our towns, but some aren't. So when we do this consultation, we don't seem to be giving it that much time, and how much consultation are we going to have on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so I've got a few other speakers. Okay, Councillor Fitzgerald.
My question is very similar to Councillor Young's. I'm interested in the time frame for this. If we're going to be consulting on it in the first quarter of next year, and this is one of the pieces that we want to take to public consultation. We don't really want to be doing the public consultation over Christmas. What are the anticipated time slots for the different sections of the methodology that's in this document? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Olive.
Thank you, Chair. 4 short questions from me. Ed will be glad to hear. Firstly, looking at paragraph, I have lost it, 2.2.1 of the report, and the section below the quoted individual sites. Does sites identified as proposed development allocations include both the first choice recommended sites and second choice sites? In Wimpole, for example, I think I'm right in saying all of the proposed allocations, or sorry, the potential allocations in the Green Wedge on the west side of the village are second choice, so obviously quite a significant point there. Question 2, if we are starting the process by taking out proposed development allocations from previously defined green wedges, are we then saying that the criteria for defining those green wedges previously were incorrect or were incorrectly applied? Have we reapplied the test that was originally applied and come to different conclusions? If so, why? What has changed that we now consider that those sites can be taken out of the green wedge? Question 3, also in 2.2.1, there's no mention of assessing green wedges that have been included in neighbourhood plans there. Why not? And question 4, I'm a little bit concerned that the evidential criteria that have been set out in the table on page something that I'm not quite sure because there's no page numbers, so just after paragraph 2.5.1, the evidential criteria there focus quite heavily on visual impact on landscapes, whereas in reality we know that landscape is socially constructed by much more than just what can be seen. So how will the assessment be taking that into account? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fernley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think mine are relatively short questions as well, and I have 3 of them. You talk about the new settlements and that we have to make that choice. How close are we to seeing that report to see where we go with that? Which leads on to the next question, which you sort of alluded to, that the wedges are put in after the development. So I know one of the places in my ward is Farringdon that you're thinking of building a new town. Yet, are you going to put any green wedges? Will there be green wedges between it and Farringdon if that happened to be the case? Has this been thought of already? It's very difficult visualising all of this lot. We've got the local plan on the interactive map, which is really great, but it would be good if we could start adding some new layers so we could see how things are changing. I mean, they don't have to be quite so interactive, but just, you know, with the green wedges to be doing something so we can see what's going on. I mean, in lots of areas, unless it's something I'm missing and there's some plans I haven't seen, it would be very helpful to be able to visualise better what's coming. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, I thought I saw your hand up, Jess. And Councillor Levine, did you have a question? Yeah, so I think I had you next. So Councillor Levine, then Councillor Bailey, and then Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates, in fact, to something that Todd said or asked. What I'm worried about in section 1.4, East Devon, the East Devon local plan takes precedence over all the neighbourhood local plans. And I'm a little worried about that because I think there's going to be a great dissatisfaction amongst the people who've set up green plans. Why would they be subservient to the overall plan of EDDC, and how are we going to sort out this sort of conflict? Because I know that a lot of councillors are really worried about not adhering to their neighbourhood plans and questioning the value of the whole thing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'll let Ed answer that one. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the report, Ed. My general feeling is that I'm not altogether happy with the proposed methodology, and it kind of is reminiscent slightly of how the boundaries have been treated. So, first of all, I don't like this disaggregated way of treating particular items, because we've had this with boundaries. So we agreed the principles as members, and then the boundaries came back in a completely unexpected, well, for my ward, completely unexpected and unanticipated way. So I think given that actually we've been calling for work on the green wedges since January 2022, I would have expected it to be a far more detailed report, for instance, overlaying the neighbourhood plan green wedges with the sites, with the proposed, some of the sites that have been put forward. I also think that there should be a third category, and other local plans do have a third category for green wedges. And one of the key reasons for having a green wedge is to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachments. So I think that should be added in. I don't actually agree that we're only looking at significant, significant encroachments. In the green wedge purpose, I don't agree that it would only prevent significant erosion of a gap. I think we should be looking at any erosion of a gap between neighbouring settlements. So I'm not altogether happy with the green wedge purpose. I think there should be the third category of preventing encroachment into the countryside, and I think we should remove significant. And then what seems to be happening is that actually there's going to be an assessment done, a landscape assessment, and I agree with Councillor Olive that green wedges isn't only about landscape. It's about other things as well. It's about the sense that you have. And I think that it's really bad not to be looking at our neighbourhood plans and basically just to be disregarding any wedges in our neighbourhood plans, because surely the neighbourhood plans have been to consultation, and there should be no reason why, if they've been approved at inspection, that they can't be incorporated. And I think it looks really high-handed of East Devon just to basically be disregarding the neighbourhood plan green wedges and not even including them in the report. So I personally think there's a lot more work to be done around green wedges. I don't agree also with 2.2.1, where we basically say, oh, well, we don't think that the green wedges will be really harmed by any of the sites we've put forward, because we've never really properly discussed green wedges. So for me, I will not be supporting bringing back a committee report in early 2024. I think we need more work to be done. I think we need to see better plans showing the neighbourhood plan green wedges. We need to have a more detailed discussion, and we need to make some modifications so that it's basically not just down to East Devon officers to go away and do a landscape assessment and then bring it back as a fait accompli for what our policy is going to be. So I think we need to have a far more meaningful debate until we before we get to that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Ingham.
Thanks, Chair. Back in the late 40s, it was decided it'd be a great idea to create the principle of areas of outstanding natural beauty. And East Devon was created in the AONB was created in 1963, and Blackdown Hills in 1991. And it was, you can understand, it was to protect the landscape value that they have. Perhaps on the back of the formation of national parks. So one of ours has been around for 60 years and the other one for 30. Green wedges have come in primarily, I know what Jess has pointed out here, but primarily to prevent coalescence. But then there's the secondary reason as well. But I think it's time we move on. And you know that, as the report says, it's up to us to define what green wedges are, you know, and to decide where they should be. And I think as time moves on, this isn't just about coalescence and protecting settlements from encroachment from an expanding nearby one. sorry, we come back. It's the climate crisis. We should be considering protecting grade 1 farmland and say, just can't do it. And where that is of primary importance, I think we should be saying, let's protect that as well. I'll just leave it at that, Chair, because we all know what I mean by that. I could waffle on, but I think we need to consider it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let Ed answer these points in a moment, but I just think there's a bit of a danger if we start conflating green wedges, which are a very specific thing, with all green space.
There's a danger, Chairman, if we're not careful, we will create this plan and we won't have protected grade 1 agricultural land, which I think is going to be very important in 2050.
Okay, I'll let Ed answer that one because that may form part of the HELAR assessment, but I'll let Ed answer that in a moment. Councillor Hartnell, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a slight link for me between the item we discussed previous and green wedges, insofar as, and the question I suppose would be, is there not a risk that these green wedges are going to be drawn for us anyway? Because if we have a lack of a 5-year housing land supply, and in my division we have an application that's live at the moment that's sitting in the green wedge between Seaton and Collie Ford, there's a high chance that that application may be approved because we do need to look at the fact that we don't have our 5-year land supply. But at the same time, we're now looking at green wedges for the new local plan. The risk is that applications that come in the meantime, and that this will be across the district, will be approved, and therefore our green wedges are going to be defined for us. That's just an observation, but I just wondered what Ed's view would be on that. Thank you.
I guess that depends on the level of protection that we give to the green wedge, isn't it, and how stringent we are on that. Okay, yeah, I see you, Ian. I haven't missed you out. You're at the bottom of a rapidly diminishing list. Don't worry. Councillor Brian Bailey.
Well, I have to agree entirely with Marcus. We had an application which I won't mention, but you'll be familiar with in Exmouth, which was in a Green Valley Park, and because of the lack of 5-year land supply, the fact that it was in a proposed Valley Park, it was totally ignored as if it wasn't there, and it's right on the built area boundary as well, and it's been in open countryside, and it was approved because of the lack of 5-year land supply. However, having said that, I consider the way to deal with this is to get the green wedges in first, and then we would know where the developer could and couldn't build. And then that way there should be no surprises. If we do it second or third or fourth, whatever, in our plans, that the developer will have complete control of where it goes. And therefore, I think that would be not a desirable thing. What I would like to see is the whole area, especially the West End, mapped out with green wedges and valley parks, and there's definitive lines where you can and cannot build, and it wouldn't take a genius to make sure they could be linked in some way in some areas. You can have cycle tracks, pleasant walks in your own country that you've created within the development. So instead of people having to drive miles to get to the countryside to go for a pleasant walk and to exercise their dog, or even a horse maybe, and go cycling or whatever, it would be there on your doorstep, and you could link from one village to the next. And I think that would be the overall plan which I would endorse and propose, Chairman. Thank you.
I'll go for that, Brian. If you can draw it up, I'll sign it.
In my spare time.
Okay. Right. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I sit on planning, and it was brought up the other day that a green wedge, depending on the planning officer, the one that is looking at it, so if it goes to appeal, basically looks at it and says, well, one field could be enough. And what you're suggesting of putting these things in, it's not going to be the magic bullet that's going to protect your towns, etc., from not having development. And I really think you're wasting time doing this. What we should be doing is sorting out this 5-year housing supply, sorting out the local plan, pulling that forward so that actually we can protect our area. And you're not going to do it by the green wedges. We've looked at it at Sidmouth and Sidbury, that we've got this area that we want to protect, and we've just been told basically you're unrealistic of what you think the green wedge is. The methodology will be put down nationally, will be agreed. You're not going to change that, and it's got to be defendable by law. So I just think that you're wasting time here. I've been to 4 of these meetings. Where are we actually getting? Are you getting any plans for? Are we actually deciding where this town's going to go? And you're wasting time. Sorry.
Well, I think we have to allow the officers to complete their work, Ian, and to do a thorough job. So, coming back into committee, Councillor Parr.
Thank you. The green wedge policy was strongly endorsed when our neighbourhood plan was put in place, and Councillor Hartnell referred to a current planning application. It's actually, there was a previous application on much the same site, which was refused at appeal, or turned down at appeal, having been refused here, because largely of the inspector's application of the existing green wedge policy. Having said that, if we, the green wedges are extremely important to communities, and I think the existing policy, which worked effectively, as I say, in my ward, I think we have got a good base there of the policy, so hopefully this new work won't take a huge amount of time, but I do think it's got to be done, and we do need people to be consulted.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ingham.
Thanks, Chair. I have to come back on what Councillor Barlow said. I don't completely disagree with him, but I think he misses a very valid point on green wedges, in that I'll be very brief and say within my ward we once had to go to appeal, and that was at a public hearing over 10 years ago about an application for 150 houses, I think, within a green wedge, and we won. And I have to say, in retrospect, the officers were all ready for us to lose, but the community put up such a strong opposition to this application. The inspector who took that final decision said, I have to take on board the community's vociferous opposition to this, and we won. So I can't agree. I can say that I'm disappointed at the speed at which we're going, but we're not wasting time discussing green wedges. It's very important. It's unfortunate, Chair, that we followed a process set out by Councillor Ledger and Mr. Freeman, whereby we were dictated the process the linear process we followed, because I think green wedges should have been discussed a very long time ago, as people have alluded to, and it would have helped. But by goodness, please take this bit very seriously. It could save your bacon in your ward over the next few years. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Coming out of committee for a moment, Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back on Councillor Bailey's point regarding green areas in the West End, the Cliff Valley Regional Park has already mapped out all the important green areas, and I'm hoping that that plus more is going to be added to the local plan when it's finally completed. Thank you.
Yep. When Councillor Bailey was describing it, I thought sounds very much like the Cliff Valley Trail. Well, what we want is to see that all over East Devon. Yeah, lots of them. Councillor Jess Bailey.
Oh no, I'll wait for Ed, if that's okay, to come back.
Okay. Yep, that's great. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I don't agree at all that we're wasting time. I think that it's very important to map out these green wedges as, as a priority. I think that including the neighbourhood plans, as Councillor Jess Bailey said, is crucial, because it's all well and good going to consultation now, but there's already a lot of work that's gone into people who know their communities and know the areas that they wish to protect. So I think that it's really important that we include those in the methodology. Otherwise, that time has been wasted, and I don't think that's fair. And I also think that this needs to progress as quickly as possible, but if we're going to have a methodology that works and is fair on the work that's already been done, I'm not sure that the sort of proposed timescale of early next year is going to work with including all of that. And I think a map, as Councillor Fernie said, layering on sort of the neighbourhood plans and all of the other plans that we've got, I think would be really helpful to visualise where we are and where we're going. Thank you.
Good. Brian, yeah.
Thank you all. If I may come back, may I possibly add a recommendation, another one, which will be number 3, that the green wedges are established and mapped before anything else, as soon as possible, so that when a developer or a planning committee or anyone else looks at what they intend to do in the future, they can see where the green wedges are. They'd be protected from the word go, and there'll be no encroachment. It'll be made quite clear that we cannot build on these right across the area. I know it's going to take a lot of work, but we've got Google Maps and things like that which would aid, so it wouldn't take that long, I wouldn't have thought. It'd be a little bit quicker than me doing it on my kitchen table, but I could need a bit of help. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'll let Ed come back on that one as well, but I think we can't treat green wedges in isolation. I think they'll have to form part of the local plan. So what we're agreeing here is the methodology for including those green wedges in the local plan. But I do agree we need to get on, and I think for various reasons we've discussed today, we need to progress the local plan. But we're not wasting time, Ian. You know, if things you do in a hurry often lead to regret. So this is welcome to local councils. You know, this is just how they work. It's taken me 4 years, but things move at a pace that makes a glacier look positively slippy, you know. Okay, but I'm going to pass over to Ed because we've had a lot of speakers there, and I'll let him answer some of the points that have been raised.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, if I go back to the start, I think we start with questions about the consultation to be undertaken with Councillors Young and Fitzgerald. I mean, I think I envisage a consultation, a sort of addendum Reg 18 consultation sort of next spring. So there's these issues around green wedges. There's a few other issues that we weren't in a position to consult on with the Reg 18 consultation that took place on the draft local plan. So green wedges, boundaries of the Cliff Valley Regional Park moving forwards. There's potentially some additional sites that have come forward through the consultation, both housing and employment sites that we need to consider. There's a few other bits and pieces that I can't remember off the top of my head. But we need to give some thought to how we do that consultation. I would suggest it's perhaps more focused on those communities actually affected by these issues. So where there is a green wedge, for example, or where they are close to the Cliff Valley Regional Park. But it may be, given the employment sites and the additional housing sites, that actually all the communities are affected in some way or form. So we need to shape that consultation to fit its purposes, but certainly the intention is to engage with those communities that are affected by the green wedges through the parish councils, through consultation with residents. Exactly what form that takes, I mean, we have a statement of community involvement on the website which talks in general terms about how we do consultation on those things, but I would envisage when we get to the point of bringing the materials for consultation to members early next year that we set out a consultation strategy at that time as to how we would go about doing that, because there are questions about, for example, last time we used the commonplace software, whether or not we want to use that again as part of this consultation, and things like that, which I'm not in a position to make a recommendation on today, but mindful that it needs to be a fully engaging consultation on these issues with the affected communities, certainly. And certainly in terms of time frame, I think we'll try and bring forward a sort of outline of a timetable, I think, to the last meeting. We'll try and bring a more detailed one next time. But I think in general terms, I'd envisage that consultation taking place next spring, with a view to trying to consult on the publication draft of the entire local plan towards the end of next year. There is a danger, and I think someone made the point about running into Christmas again. There is a danger of that happening based on current timetables. So that is an issue that will prompt perhaps a debate about when we bring a more detailed report on timetables next time. Turning to Councillor Olive's questions. So I've got then, does the site identified in, well, when we're talking about sites identified, I think the question was, does that include first and second choice sites? I think the intention was that it did, but I think it raises an interesting point in Councillor Olive's case, in that Wimple and Fennerton, we obviously identified a lot of second choice sites. Because there was this option within the consultation about putting larger scale strategic growth at Wimple and Fennerton, members may recall. So it does raise an interesting question there. I note, looking at the draft plan, only one of those sites was actually within the existing green wedge to the southwest of Wimple. So I think there's a chicken and egg issue here in terms of members making a decision about the scale of growth they want to see at Wimple and how that impacts. If members want to see a larger than anticipated level of growth, shall we say, in the draft plan, then there would be a question as to whether or not that site is entertained or not, given its position within the green wedge. I think I'm going to have to give some further thought to how we deal with Wimple and Fennerton in terms of that. I think we probably don't include them at this stage, but except that we might have to come back to them if the view is that the members want, well, when members have made that decision about levels of growth at Wimple and Fennerton. It is always one of the challenges with local plans, is what order do you make some of these decisions in? Next question I had down from Councillor Olive was, if we're excluding sites that were previously in green wedge, what went wrong previously with the green wedge boundaries? I don't think it means anything necessarily went wrong with the green wedge boundaries previously. I think there is a question, this might be controversial in our minds as officers, as to whether or not some of the green wedges are perhaps larger than they needed to be, in terms of when you look at their purpose, which is to prevent settlement coalescence fundamentally, and some of them are quite substantial. So I think I think that's part of the question we're posing to ourselves, and what can reasonably be defended in the current position in terms of government guidance for these local level designations, and what's actually necessary to prevent settlement coalescence. So I think it comes back to those two key purposes, to prevent the coalescence of settlements and to maintain a sense of place and identity for communities. I don't think just because something was allocated as a green wedge previously necessarily means it needs to be going forward. We need to do an assessment against the criteria we're assessing now, and what government guidance and is coming out of local plan examinations, etc. now. So I don't think it necessarily means something went wrong previously we're in a different space now, and we need to look at these things afresh. There was a suggestion that there was no mention of assessing green wedges in neighbourhood plans. I think it's a fair point that it's not mentioned in the methodology itself. There is reference in the covering report at paragraph 1.4. It says, in addition, several made neighbourhood plans include policies with similar aims to green wedges, although they may use different terminology. These will be taken into account in the new assessments. Once the new local plan is adopted, it will take precedence over any made neighbourhood plans. That's in the legislation. We can't change that whether we like it or not. The local plan does take precedence over neighbourhood plans. So we will need to look at those areas identified in neighbourhood plans, whether they've used the term green wedge or something similar, and see whether or not they meet our criteria, and we feel that they should be allocated as a green wedge in the local plan. That doesn't mean that it would necessarily remove whatever designation went into the relevant neighbourhood plan, but obviously it has more weight if it's allocated as a green wedge in the local plan, given that the local plan takes precedent over the neighbourhood plan. And then I think finally from Councillor Olive was the criteria being very dependent on what can be seen and not other factors. I mean, I think the reason for that is, again, coming back to the purpose of green wedges, which is about, let's say, primarily preventing settlement coalescence. I don't think we want to get into conflating that with other protections that protect countryside. We have to bear in mind there are policies in the plan that protect all areas of countryside outside built-up area boundaries, and those policies themselves are quite strong in terms of preventing inappropriate development in those locations. The green wedges add an additional layer of protection where settlements are close to one another, particularly where there's a town close to a village on its periphery, in terms of preventing settlement coalescence. I think that's primarily about visually what you can see and having that visual gap between the two settlements. I don't think issues around sort of the sense of that place, the tranquility and calmness, those are more criteria around an area of outstanding natural beauty or other landscape designations. They're not so much about the purpose of green wedges, but they might be additional benefits to having those green wedges, in that you have those open areas, but fundamentally its purpose is about a visual break and visual separation. So we don't want to conflate the criteria of a green wedge with criteria around other countryside designations, I think. I think Councillor Fernley was raising about the new community options. So yes, I mean, I understand the strong desire, no doubt, from residents of Farringdon and other communities close to the proposed new community to have green wedges designated sooner rather than later and give them the clarity about where development would go and where it wouldn't. As said, and as we said in the methodology, I think it's difficult to do that at this point, particularly without a decision being made about which of the options for a new community is to be taken forward, but also without master planning the favoured option, to understand where within the land mass that we've identified, bearing in mind those three options include enough land for all uses and activities for that community, including open spaces, sports pitches, delivery of sangs and all of those things. We don't actually know at this stage where within those land areas development would be taking place and where those sort of greener uses would be taking place. And it may be that through sensitive master planning we can ensure that things like sangs and informal open spaces and things are on the edges of the settlements closest to Farringdon and other settlements that might be fearful of settlement coalescence, and address those issues that way. And then from there, I think it would be more appropriate to then look at green wedges once we've done all of that work, which might not be in this plan period, but given that I suspect ground won't be broken on a new community for another 10 years from now, and if we adopt the plan on the current timescale and then review it 5 years later, its chances are either ground won't have been broken or will only recently have been broken before we are into the point of making those decisions about green wedges. So that seems a more logical sequence of events in my mind than starting to guess where a green wedge might be needed at some point in the future now. interactive layers in terms of the local plan. So yes, we've got the interactive local plan of the existing local plan. We wouldn't usually develop a full interactive thing for the new local plan until that's finalised and adopted. Otherwise, we're forever changing and switching things around. There is the commonplace consultation tool that ran for the draft local plan. That is still on there and provides an interactive plan. I think of at least the proposed allocations. I think it might have some of the boundaries, settlement boundaries and other things on there as well. So it does provide some interactive mapping for what's coming forward, which I think was the point. But I think it's difficult to put resource into developing a full interactive plan at this stage. Okay. I think Councillor Levine was asking why neighbourhood plans take precedent over local plan. As I said, that's in the legislation fundamentally. So effectively there's a tier system and the local plan can supersede neighbourhood plans. I think it's an ongoing theme during the local plan work in terms of to what extent we're comfortable doing that. I think part of the challenge is the level of evidence that's needed for something to go into a local plan is much higher than it is for a neighbourhood plan. So just because something's in a neighbourhood plan doesn't necessarily mean that it should go in the local plan, that we'd be able to defend it at a local plan examination. So the two processes are quite different, and so I think we need to be stringent in terms of our evidence production and ensuring that what we're putting in is sound, that we pay due heed to what's in the neighbourhood plans and consider that. But it may be that just because something's identified as a green wedge or similar in a neighbourhood plan doesn't necessarily mean that under our criteria and the evidence that we have to produce for a local plan that we can necessarily translate that into a green wedge in the local plan. But we do need to go through that process of assessing that and reviewing that. I think that picks up on some of Councillor Bailey's points. In terms of needing more, I mean, I think in terms of the process, which I think was one of the things Councillor Bailey was raising, was in my mind, it made complete sense to bring a report about the methodology to members first and ask members to agree the methodology before we go ahead and do all of the work in terms of drawing the boundaries. And I think that ensures a consistency of approach. I think as soon as we start doing the work and then bringing that alongside the boundaries, there's a danger that because of local issues in a particular area, a community or a member wants the boundary drawn in a particular way, that might deviate from a common methodology we've used across the area. So I think it's more logical to agree the methodology, us to go away and consistently apply that. It doesn't mean that when the boundaries come back and go out to consultation they can't be changed. It's not a fait accompli. Of course it's an open consultation and there are opportunities to amend them. But we need to be mindful of our methodology and have a consistent approach in terms of how we apply that. Doesn't mean we can't tweak things later if needed though. The other point I'd make in terms of that, I think, and Councillor Bailey's comments is, and Councillor Brian Bailey's comments as well, is I think there's a danger always when we talk about green wedges of confusing them with other landscape designations. So, for example, I think the case that Councillor Brian Bailey was mentioning was within a proposed Valley Park area in the Exmouth neighbourhood plan, but it is not in a green wedge. I think it's the Douglas Gardens site you were referring to, so that wasn't a green wedge because it wouldn't lead to settlement coalescence with another settlement. In fact, it was probably between two parts of the same settlement. And I think this is where green wedges get, I think everybody probably gets slightly confused by green wedges. They are simply about containing settlement coalescence and they're not a moratorium on development even then. Everything that's beyond the built-up area boundaries is protected as countryside under our policies anyway, and then obviously for about 2/3 of the district we've got areas of outstanding natural beauty as well, so there's a huge amount of protection in place for areas outside of the settlements, aside from the green wedges. But I mean, I think the suggestion about I think Councillor Brian Bailey was basically suggesting a green infrastructure strategy almost to identify the areas that are important corridors and movement spaces between settlements, and I think that's a piece of work that it would be really good to do. It hasn't happened fundamentally. Resource-wise, the only green infrastructure resource we've had has been dedicated to the Cliffs Valley Regional Park, but I think that is something that we need to explore moving forward in terms of green infrastructure strategies across the whole district for all of the settlements, particularly given the need to promote more sustainable forms of transport and make walking and cycling more attractive and easier for people, and creating further routes to achieve that, I think is an important objective that we should be trying to take forward. And we need to look at how that could be resourced and be brought forward, not necessarily as part of the local plan, but perhaps as something that would follow on from that and be informed by that. And finally, I think the last note I'd written down was Councillor Hartnell's point about the implications of 5-year housing and supply. And I mean, I think, as I was sort of saying in relation to the previous report, there are landscape designations that have a significant impact in the balance in terms of considering housing and supply positions such as areas of outstanding natural beauty, European designated habitats and things like that, but green wedges are not among those designations. It's a local level designation, and so as with all the other issues, it needs to be weighed in the balance, in that tilted balance equation when considering sites where housing is to be provided that would help to improve the housing and supply position. I'd also flag up in relation to that Strategy 8 development in green wedges in the adopted local plan is not a moratorium on development either. It says development would not be permitted if it would add to existing sporadic or isolated development or damage the individual identity of a settlement or could lead to or encourage settlement coalescence. So when considering housing sites at the moment, we need to apply the tilted balance, but also need to consider that it may be that development can be accommodated to some extent in green wedges without adding to existing sporadic or isolated development or leading to settlement coalescence. I can certainly recall cases where even when we did have a 5-year housing land supply, we as officers were recommending approval of small incursions into green wedges because it didn't harm the criteria of the policy. So I fear there are a lot of misconceptions out there about green wedges and their significance. They are not a moratorium on development, and they are only a local level landscape designation ultimately. So the weight is nowhere near as significant as areas of outstanding natural beauty. And even where we don't have green wedges, we have all the other countryside protection policies. Hopefully that covers everything. I probably rambled on forever there, but hopefully it's helpful. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you, Ed. I suddenly realised we'd gone through an awful lot of speakers for you to reply to, so I'll try and sort of give you a chance to respond more frequently. Yeah, I've got your Councillor Family. I did just have one question myself, Ed. Looking at the land to the north and northeast of Exmouth then, that wasn't there to prevent settlement coalescence, so presumably that was to do with the Pebblebed Heaths, was it? And would that be covered under this methodology, or would it kind of be eroded by using this methodology?
Land northeast of Exmouth. So just looking.
There's no settlement it could coalesce with.
I mean, there's the green wedge between Exmouth and
Lympstone,
which extends across sort of to the north of Exmouth, north of Alleronde. But the green wedge doesn't extend further round to the north east.
No, I think it's the Bystock area we're talking about through that north and northeast designation.
No, I disagree, Chair. I disagree in that there has been the fear since the creation of that green wedge, as that there's been a pattern, and I've heard officers say, "Oh well, we don't see any boundary between the parish and the town, and so let's go east around the green wedge." So that's why there's the desire to extend the green wedge further to the east to stop, going round the edge of the green wedge, and for Exmouth not to keep expanding in a northeasterly direction. Councillor Young knows that as well, if you want to ask him.
Thank you. I'll get Ed to come back on that in a moment, though, because I need an answer to my question. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, there is also the 400 metre distance from the pebble beds, which is class as triple SI, that you can't build on, which is a natural England requirement that's included in the local plan. I think that's what you're talking about, north of east of Exmouth, towards the pebble bed heaths. You've got this wedge that they can't build on.
So, but that's not green wedge. That's just to do with, yeah, and that would trump any green wedge anyway, because that is a national prohibition. We hope, yeah, because it's a triple SI, I think, isn't it, the pebble bed heath. So it has a much higher level of protection. Okay, got a couple of speakers wishing to come back. Councillor Fernley.
Thank you, Chair. This is to come back to Ed about the green infrastructure thing that he was thinking needs consultation on, or they need to look at. At the moment, DCC are doing an LC whip of the area, and I know that the officers have been asked to consult on this. It seems such a shame that the two are not being done simultaneously, because a lot of the cycle routes and walking routes will be the same. So it would be better value for the county and our area if these things could be looked at together. We've got lots of people in our area desperate to be able to get into Exeter more easily by cycle, and there's all sorts of blocks in the way. So yeah, we welcome anything to do with that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good piece of work to do, Ed. Okay, Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you. I think people do actually understand green wedges and the value of them, so I don't really agree with that point. But I also don't understand why we cannot have clarity when we have a report like this on where are the green wedges in the neighbourhood plans, and I find it really difficult to accept 2.2.1. I'll say this again, because when has this committee ever discussed the settlement, the fact that allocations which are in existing green wedges, that's okay? Because that might have been discussed by officers, but I don't think this committee has ever discussed that. So I think, like other people have said, I think Councillor Young, there's an issue because we're kind of shoehorning now green wedges into sites that officers have considered are okay, and that's not the right way round, I don't think. So I will not be supporting this, because I think that we should be having greater clarity on our neighbourhood plans and the green wedges in them, and I think that we should have that as an interim report, because otherwise all we're effectively doing is being asked to rubber stamp officers' landscape appraisals, and I think there's more to green wedges than that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Levine.
Just on the point of information, if the wedges, as I understand it, the purpose of the wedges is to separate communities or develop settlements, is there a minimum size? I mean, can a green wedge simply be 1 lane wide?
Probably not, but we'll come back to Ed in a moment for that. I think it would depend on the topography, wouldn't it? You know, it depends whether that lane is like a cliff or a forest or whatever it is. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you. Thanks for your response, Mr. Freeman, to my request for more clarity on the timing, the timescale of the proposed actions. It was my understanding that at some point the town councils and parish councils would be asked to provide some input, as in potentially new suggestions or suggestions to rejig some of the green wedges that are already in their areas. And I may have misunderstood, but I thought that this form would be made available beyond the officers and this committee, and that might form the basis of consultation with town and parish councils. Have I misunderstood this, or will there be a point at which the town and parish councils are asked to provide their suggestions for new green wedges or amendments to existing ones? May I also ask an additional question? It's regarding the two criteria for the evaluation against green wedge. The two purposes of the green wedge. One is to prevent the coalescence of settlements, and then secondly to maintain a sense of place and identity for communities. So is it in principle okay to have a green wedge within a parish or within a settlement boundary? There's certainly one already within Budley Salterton, and I'm thinking about the other villages in my ward, some of which are 1,000+ years old and which give onto commons. Protecting some of that accessibility, is that something that, for example, would be considered as helping to maintain a sense of place and identity for communities? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Howe.
Oh dear. Right. I suppose I'll ask committee at the first. We need to get back to the recommendations at some point, because at some point we need to shape these recommendations into some form of way forward. But going on from there, I think committee and other councillors are looking at green wedges as a line on a map, a drawing on a map. The issue is planning inspectors, when they go to appeal, and particularly local plan appeals, look at the words and then they interpret that on the ground. And that's why appeals, we take planning appeals, are diverse. Lots of appeals in green wedges are allowed, others are not because of the words connected to them. And when I come back to a local area, Topsham encounters Weir, successive appeals have made what was called the Topsham Gap, a green wedge, have been eroded down to, I think it's about one field now, whereas that was quite a gap before. So you can't concentrate on what a line on a map draws, you need to look at the words, which is what Mr. Freeman is trying to do. I don't always agree he's got it really right, but that's a different question. But that's what we need to concentrate on, is what the words mean to take back. So I do think we need to change the recommendation, but how we do that is differently. I also need to raise words of caution. I think it was in the West Midlands area. Not long ago, a local plan was thrown out for having too many green wedges by the local plan inspector. So there is a real resistance to just going blasé with green wedges. We won't get away with it. We won't succeed. We need to have a purpose, a means, and an understanding in policy terms of why a green wedge is there and what it's doing, not just to stop development, which we're not going to win on. Now, going from there to a lot of the other discussions, I've long disagreed with Mr. Freeman, as he knows that I've said this should be coming forward alongside development proposals so we can overlap the two maps and then have a sensible discussion in this committee as to which we think wins, development or green wedge. Because it's not going to be a carte blanche, one size fits all. It needs to be, and it needs to be done in public, which is what we're trying to avoid here. justification, understanding, and we've got to build so many homes. It's going to be in areas none of us like, quite simply. That's what the planning committee is going through every month at this minute in time, making unavoidable decisions. So I come back to the original statement. We need to come to recommendations that we can take forward that change the current recommendations. And the first one I would say is we need to remove the word endorse, because I do think more work needs doing on it. So I don't think we should endorse anything at this minute in time, but we should ask for the more information or the way forward that we need to come to a compromise. But I haven't got the answer to that, so I hope you guys have.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Councillor Brian Bailey, then I'll ask Ed to respond to some of these points.
Thank you, Ollie. I know it's a bit early, but having listened with great interest to this discussion, when these green wedges are in place, I've got two questions. Who's going to maintain them physically? And would it be a good idea to plant as many broadleaf trees as possible on these, to clear up the environment, to soak up some carbon, because that's a very good way of doing it, and we have a little forest here, there and everywhere which would look wonderful, and it'd be very good for the wildlife. And I know it's early days yet, but if you don't put something like that at the beginning, you'll put all this in place and then find out that no one's obliged to maintain them. So I think that ought to be in a paragraph at least.
Okay, I'll let Ed come back
Thank
on
you.
that one. Okay, Ed, would you like to respond to some of those points that have been made?
Thank you, Chair. So I think since I last came back, you, Chair, raised the point about northeast of Exmouth. I mean, there isn't a green wedge there at the moment. I think Councillor Young's quite right to point out the 400-metre distance from the public bed heaths that needs to be maintained in terms of residential development. I think there have been, thinking back to comments received to the consultation on the draft plan, I think there have been suggestions that there should be more green wedge there in terms of separation between Exmouth and up to Woodbury, I think. I mean, we can look at that through this work. My initial thought is it's quite a big gap between Exmouth and Woodbury, and I do question the need to have a green wedge over such a distance. But I wouldn't want to preempt what we would do under this methodology, so we can certainly look at that and see if we think that's necessary. Councillor Fernie made a good point about the LC WIP, which is being developed by Devon County at the moment, so that will pick up on important transport corridors, particularly walking cycling routes. It's only around the sort of eastern edge of Exeter, though. I think long term it would be great to have green infrastructure strategies for all of the towns, and certainly would envisage aligning that with the LC WIP work and working with Devon County Council in terms of cycling, walking routes within those areas. But I would see the GI strategy being more than just about the routes, but about what green corridors do they sit within and how do those come forward and how's that resolved. So it could be a sort of next stage of work for the LC WIP, using that as a foundation, I think. Councillor Jess Bailey raised a few points about where the green wedges are in neighbourhood plans. I think it's a slightly complex picture with neighbourhood plans, because I think a lot of them have not necessarily referred to them as green wedges but called them something slightly different. All of the neighbourhood plans that are made or out to consultation are on our website, but we don't have those mapped in that way. But as I say, we will look at them as part of this work and see if they should be translated into green wedges within the new local plan. I get the issue about the relationship between the green wedges and the allocation, and I think it's a bit chicken and egg, as I've said before, about how we do that. I'm open to suggestions if you want to consider them at the same time. I guess we could. I'm not sure what that does with the timetable, though, given that we have consulted on the sites, we haven't consulted on the green wedge boundaries. So somehow those two pieces of work, I agree, need to be brought together in some way. maybe a suggestion would be if we go ahead and do this work in terms of the boundaries, we can obviously note where there is conflict between a potential allocation and the green wedge, and prompt more of a discussion about how that's resolved when we bring the work back early next year, rather than delay the green wedge work, because I think there's a lot of progress that could still be made on identifying the appropriate boundaries, and then it's just left as a choice as to whether or not a particular site is allocated for development and therefore taken out of the green wedge, or not allocated for development, in which case it's then within the green wedge. I don't think it need necessarily delay what we're proposing to do with this work, but agree that needs to be aligned somehow. I think Councillor Levine raised the point about the sort of minimum size of a green wedge. I think it's difficult to give a specific amount, because it's going to very much depend on topography. You know, what's as the chair said, you know, if there's a forest within there, you might have more of a visual break across a single field because of that than you would in some locations where it might be several fields. So I think that's one of the challenges of doing this work, is what's needed might be a greater green wedge in some locations than others. I don't think there's a particular prescriptive amount we could say. If one settlement's at a significantly higher level than another, then a relatively small gap might be needed, because visually there isn't that close relationship. As if they're on the same level as each other, it's more of a visual distance. As the Vice Chair says, in terms of Exeter and Topsham, they're very much on a level. The single field is pretty open from what I can recall, and basically you can drive along there and you don't really feel like you've left Topsham and entered Exeter at all anymore. That's not obviously wasn't within our control, but that's what's happened elsewhere, and obviously there is that risk that we need to manage in terms of our own settlements here. Coming to Councillor Fitzgerald's points, in terms of suggestions from town and parish councils in terms of new green wedges and amendments to green wedges, I don't think I'd ever suggested that we would go out and sort of give them an open invitation to make suggestions. What I would envisage us doing is we do the work that's set out in this methodology and come up with our proposals, and then we consult on those, and through that route they would be open to make suggestions and say, actually, we think you've got this wrong, we think this boundary should actually be over here, or have you looked at an additional green wedge here, we actually think you've got that wrong and we should have it there. So that would, to my mind, be their opportunity to do that. And as I say, I think some of the consultation responses received to the Reg 18 draft consultation talked about areas where people felt green wedges should go, so we can look back at that and take those on board through this work as well. So I think there'll be an opportunity to do that, but I would see it as us doing our bit first and then consulting on that, and people having the opportunity to comment and make suggestions through that route. In terms of, I wasn't quite sure on the last point in terms of a green wedge. I think you said a green wedge within a settlement boundary. I'm just looking at a map of Budleigh Salterton. There's one that's outside of the built-up area boundary of Budleigh Salterton, but sort of separating two parts of the town, because you've got a slightly strange shaped built-up area boundary at the moment. Yeah. So that is a green wedge, but it's outside of the built-up area boundary. But I think it's another one that raises an interesting question, because I suppose it's creating settlement coalescence between two parts of the same settlement. But in terms of the second criteria about, you know, the identity of the settlement, the identity of the communities is the same. It's the same community. So be interesting to see how we assess that. I mean, I guess arguably Knowle is a village that has joined on to Budleigh Salterton historically, but it is already joined. This is where I'm getting into the work that needs to be done in terms of looking at these, but it obviously raises some interesting issues in terms of the assessment work we need to do. It's no good me doing the assessment here now, but we'll need to look at that. And then finally, I think Councillor Brian Bailey was saying about the maintenance of green wedges and potential for tree planting. I mean, ultimately, the maintenance for green wedges has been no different to any other fields anywhere else. Ultimately, it's for the landowners to maintain the fields as they see fit, and if they want to plant trees, they can. You don't need planning permission to plant trees. Whether or not there's funding out there to help to fund the delivery of tree planting that we could use to perhaps encourage tree planting in those areas through other projects that the countryside team might be overseeing, we could perhaps investigate. But ultimately, the maintenance of that land would fall to the landowner. Thank you, Chair.
Right, I've got a few people actually, Brian. So I think we'll take a few more speakers and then we're going to have to go to a vote because we've still got another item and it's 12:30. And I think we've given this one a pretty good airing. I'm going to go outside committee first to Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted Ed to say the proposed methodology that you've suggested that we adopt here, one presumes that is best practice from other peoples that have gone to a local plan that has been accepted by the planning inspector as an acceptable way forward to do this. So it will stand up when you actually go to your local plan. So we can sit here and talk about it forever, but that's basically what you've got to do if you want the inspector to accept it when it gets into a local plan. The other thing I would suggest is, could we not have a small working group that would look into these corridors that we're talking about, the nature corridors and the transport corridors, that would actually work with parish councils to get them involved in this plan at an early stage, that could then go back to officers rather than expecting officers to do all of this work because they haven't got time to do it, which is why we're miles behind, not just because of there isn't enough of them or the rest of it, but we are behind on this and it will put us further and further behind. Whereas this committee could set up a working group to pull people together. There is, in my parish, I know, in my town, there is a biodiversity group that would love to help on this sort of thing. They're working within our parish on this and they would love to join up with other people so that we could get corridors right across East Devon that would be to the benefit and probably carry, I would believe, more weight than you just saying it's a green wedge, which basically, as Ed has told you, does not have, it has less weight than an AONB. And we know people building the AONB because they haven't got a 5-year housing plan because of this tilted balance. Anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. That's an interesting suggestion. I'll let Ed come back on that one. Staying outside committee, Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Knoll, you find, is part of East Budleigh and not Budleigh Salterton, and I think that's why the green wedge is stuck where it is to stop Budleigh Salterton expanding into East Budleigh. At one time, it just used to be called Budleigh, and it was East Budleigh. So there's a bit of history there. Coastal protection areas we haven't talked about, which is something I've never understood. Is it protecting the coast or is it protecting the view from the coast, or is it protecting the countryside from the coast? I don't know. But we're basically talking about the green wedge, not nature corridors or anything like that, which is a lot bigger piece of work. All we're doing is discussing the areas between communities to start coalescence. Thank you.
Good point. Right, two more speakers from inside committee and then we're going to go to a vote. Councillor Ingham.
I'm sorry, Chair. I request that we go to a vote immediately because I think we debated it long enough. That's my request if it's seconded.
Okay.
And the change to the recommendation is, instead of the word endorse, I would say refine the proposed methodology for defining green wedges set out in Appendix 1 of this report, and to include the observations and comments made by this committee during the debate of this item, and for Mr. Freeman obviously to listen back and to include them and then carry on, and its use in the preparation of green wedge boundaries for consultation. So basically I'm saying exactly as printed plus what we've said, and if we don't do that, Chair, we're just sanctioning Ed Freeman's very credible reports every time, and we might as well not have stood in May. The second part, and I don't mean that as I'm flattering to Mr. Freeman, we've got to have some input, and that's got to be included. And then agree that the proposed green wedges be brought back to committee in Q1 of 2024 for members' consideration. That could be January, Chair, we wouldn't be offended, but April would not be good. That's the inference.
Okay, Q1. Okay, thank you. I'll come back to Mr. Hunter on that, whether we can incorporate. I'm sorry, I'm not going to take any more speakers. Councillor Bailey, you wanted to come back on some. Yep, great, good. In that case, I'm going to go to Mr. Hunter to look at these amended
Sorry, Chair. I think Councillor Bailey and I had an amendment that we wanted to make to those recommendations to request that the methodology be brought back to this committee before the process is actually undertaken, so that we can ensure that our concerns, legitimate, serious concerns, are properly taken account of before the work is done.
So what are we saying about the existing methodology, that we don't agree with it?
I think
and what specific changes do we want to see in it then? I don't think we can just ask for a further report on the methodology.
No, it's to update the current one, Chair.
Excuse me, we've got a report on the methodology, so if you want to bring a report back, I think we need to be very clear on what we're asking the officers to do. How are we proposing to amend the methodology? What do we want to see? Councillor Bailey.
Well, some of the things that I would want to see, I would seek clarification. We don't even know where the green wedges in our neighbourhood plans are. So we don't have an overall sense, actually, of what this committee is proposing to do to communities across the district and change things that they've already done a lot of work on. So it needs to be refined so that we're actually clear on potential conflict between what we're doing and existing neighbourhood plans. So that's one thing. We need to be clear on 2.2.1 because we don't have any clear sense, not in a kind of aggregated version of where there's conflict between existing sites or proposed sites and the green wedges. So Mr. Freeman says it's chicken, it's a question of chicken or egg, but I think it's quite clear that green wedges come first and sites come second. So I want to be clear as a member of this committee, where exactly are those conflicts? Because although we've had consultations on the sites, it's impossible to know because all of us don't actually know where everybody else's green wedges are. So that needs to be put forward into the site. So that's two things for starters, and there's probably other things as well. Oh, the third thing is I think it's far too heavily based on visual factors. So I think that it's not just about, it should definitely not just be about an officer going and doing a landscape appraisal of, how they look and views. Because actually, for me, the identity of settlements is not just about the gap in between, it's about how encroaching and expanding changes the sense of identity within that settlement. So I don't think it's just about visual separation between the two settlements, and also I don't think it's significant. I think there's reference to significant in, as I've said earlier, and I think there should be consideration of taking that out. And other green wedges do actually talk about preventing, assisting in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. And I've heard what Mr. Freeman has said about, there's other policies and doesn't carry much weight and everything. But if other councils can have that as a purpose, and I don't see why we can't. So I think there is consideration, and I do think that, bearing in mind we started talking about green wedges in January 2022, and this is the first report that's come back, I think it's fair enough to ask for a refinement, and those are some of the things that I would like to see refined.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, can I just say that my proposal still stands because that's on record. Councillor Peggy's just said that. So Mr Freeman can listen to that, take that on board. And my concern is, Chairman, because we're mentioning about, someone said, these green wedges being taken for consultation. I seriously recommend they don't. We want to act fast. People don't want to see us erode those green wedges. If it's anything plus and further consideration, I think they'll be thrilled and relieved that we've done so. I don't think you need to go to consultation specifically on green wedges.
Okay. I'm going to turn to Mr Hunter just to ask where we are procedurally now, because we've got an amendment to the existing recommendation, and we ought to vote on that amendment before we go any further.
Yeah. I think we need to just clear up exactly what that amendment is in my mind. So I've put down my comments as I understood it, and then once we've actually cleared up what the amendment is, I think we then need to hear from Ed whether that's feasible, and then we could perhaps look at a vote. So if we start with the first bit of that, as I understand it, you've now suggested that an amendment to the first recommendation, so instead of saying endorse the proposed methodology, you're now suggesting that it should read refine the proposed methodology for defining green wedges set out in Appendix 1 of this report, and to include the observations and comments of this committee. Is that correct?
No, you're talking about the amendment. Theirs is an amendment.
Talk about yours.
But mine was a proposal. So it's the original proposal.
Can you just then clarify? Sorry,
what you said is right, but you said amendment.
So I've just said here that my understanding of what you put forward was refine the proposed methodology for defining green wedges as set out in Appendix 1 of this report to include the observations and comments of this committee.
Yes.
That's what you're proposing, yeah?
And to be taken on board
and
by
its use in the preparation of green wedge boundaries for consultation. So that's what you're saying.
Yes.
That's the amended wording that you're putting forward for number 1. Number 2, I didn't quite catch that.
It's the same, but instead of sometime in 2024, and say Q1 2024, being specific. That
in when, sorry?
Q1.
Q1, right.
Instead of...
So that's January, February, March. That must come back.
Yep. So now the second one would be agree that the proposed green wedges be brought to committee in Q1 of 2024 for members' consideration.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's it. That's the 2 amendments as far as you're concerned. Okay. The only concern I've got about that is saying to refine the proposed methodology set out to include the observations and comments of this committee. There's obviously been quite a lot of observations and comments of this committee, and then if officers try to take those on board, will they take on board everything that you all think that they're going to take on board? Will they not? Then how will we know if they've taken them on board? Then we'll probably have to come back to double check that they've taken them on board. So it does open up a little bit of a can of worms, which I would like Ed to perhaps comment on first. Thank you.
Yeah. What I was trying to clarify was how exactly are we proposing to modify the methodology?
I think the thing is sometimes to do that, you specifically have to say either you endorse the methodology or you say we endorse it except for we want to change this, we want to change that, and we want to change this. That would be more clear.
Yeah, okay, can I come back, Chair, just to explain that? As far as I'm concerned, I heard Ed Freeman come back on a number of points and said he could take those on board. He made that quite clear, which is not quite the same as what it says in the recommendation. So that's why my inference of refining this to include what we've said and Mr. Freeman has almost endorsed by saying, yeah, I can understand that. That's enough. I do not subscribe to having the report brought back to us yet again for further debate, because that endangers delay to the process, which I think we should avoid.
I think it just introduces, though, a little bit of uncertainty because, I mean, you're putting a lot into Mr. Freeman's hands then as to whether or not he's fully understood what you want him to fully understand. perhaps he might, and you might be delighted with what comes forward as a result. But I've just got this concern that if he doesn't, in your minds, fully take on board everything you've said, then where does that leave us? Can we hear from you, Ed?
Right, I think I see Marcus waving his hand, and I'm hoping that he's got a compromise or a suggested amendment that might get us out of this situation.
Well, I'm not so sure I have as such, but I'm just wanting to make an observation that much of the debate I don't think has actually touched on too much detail of the methodology anyway, if I'm completely honest. So I'm not quite sure what we can actually pick out of the debate that's going to change the methodology massively. I think Councillor Barlow kind of nailed it for me insofar as other authorities have used this methodology and come to successful conclusions on their green wedge policies. And I think I'm right in saying that this is going to come back to us anyway insofar as we will have a report with more maps and boundaries, which I think is the crux of what members are looking for at this stage. So we need to allow this methodology to proceed to get us to a point where we've got more detail and maps where we can then get into the nitty-gritty of debating it before it goes to consultation. So in light of all that, I would actually be looking to propose the recommendations as printed to allow us to move to a point where we can actually debate the detail.
Yeah.
That would be a no, it's just a proposal in its own right. Thank you, Chair.
Well, we'll have to vote on the amendment and then take that as a proposal. Ed.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I shared Mr. Hunter's concerns about, members' expectations that there's going to be changes to this, when I think a lot of the comments that were raised, as Councillor Hartman said, were not necessarily direct changes to the methodology. They were perhaps peripheral issues about specific areas that people wanted to look at, which I'm happy to take away and look at, but it's not going to change the methodology. It's about how and where we apply the methodology. The two key things I've picked up on that I think potentially need changing in the methodology from what I've heard members say is one, a clear recognition in the methodology that we will look at areas identified in neighbourhood plans that have been allocated for the purposes of preventing settlement coalescence, whatever they've called them, whether it's a green wedge or whatever, that we will look at those and assess them under this criteria in terms of those areas to look at whether or not they should be identified as green wedges in the local plan. The other thing I've identified is a concern about it's paragraph 2.2.1 in the methodology and how we're looking to deal with this conflict between potential site allocations and green wedges. And I would suggest that I take away an action to, rather than to not reassess those sites, that we, in our report back, flag up where there is a conflict between a proposed allocation and a green wedge, and just flag that up so that members are aware of that potential conflict and can take forward through debate which are potentially taken forward as allocations and which the green wedge precedent would apply to, in effect. So I would suggest, if members are happy, that we identify those as the key changes to the methodology from the debate, that I take away the suggested areas that people want us to look at, which I'll listen back to the recording and make a note of and instruct officers to look at those areas. But other than that, I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there were other material changes that would affect the methodology.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the points was about neighbourhood plans, and that did seem to be particularly contentious. So I'm going to suggest that we make recommendation 2 then, that the officers use neighbourhood plans to identify areas and to assess them against the methodology. And then item 3 would become the existing item 2, agree the proposed green wedges then be brought to committee in Q1 of 2024. How does that sound to you, Mr. Hunter? So you're withdrawing your suggested amendments, and we make that.
Clarifying the amendment.
Okay.
Recommendation 1, where it says refines, in that middle part of that recommendation, to itemise the 3 points relating to the methodology as described by Mr. Freeman, and you can perhaps do that later, where Mr. Freeman can define that exactly and save us time.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take any more speakers because we've given this a really thorough airing. So I'm going to go to Mr. Hunter to tell us where he thinks we've got to, and check with Ed that he's happy with those recommendations.
Okay. So as I understand it now, it would be to refine the proposed methodology for defining green wedges set out in Appendix 1 of this report to include the 3 key changes that Mr. Freeman's just outlined, which hopefully Ed has the wording for. Yeah. That this is what I'm just going to ask him to do, yes. So basically, so we refine the proposed methodology for defining green wedges as set out in Appendix 1 of this report, to include the 3 key changes outlined by Mr. Freeman, which he's going to do now, and to use that then in the preparation of the green wedge boundaries for consultation. So subject to him reading these out now and you being happy with that, then that's the proposal number 1. And then number 2, agree that the proposed green wedges be brought to committee in the first quarter of 2024 for members' consideration. Yeah.
Okay.
So we just need to hear these 3 things now from Ed and double check that you're happy with them.
Yeah.
And I think we've got
okay, Ed.
So through Chair, my understanding is recommendation 1 would then read, amend the proposed methodology for defining green wedges set out in Appendix 1 of this report to include consideration of all areas identified in neighbourhood plans that seek to prevent settlement coalescence, to identify conflicts between proposed allocations and green wedges for members to give further consideration to, and to ensure that all of the areas identified by members for potential green wedges are considered under the methodology, and that the methodology is used in the preparation of green wedge boundaries for consultation.
Okay. Are we happy with that? Go on then, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Very much. Can we also include taking into account the feedback on green wedges from the Section 18 consultation? Thank you.
Yep, I think Ed's adding that in. Right. Where have we got to? So, are we all clear that we're now we've changed the first recommendation to refine it and to include the criteria that Ed has just outlined, and that a report will be brought back to committee in Q1 of 2024. Yeah,
that's fine. Yep.
We're happy with that. Okay. In that case, do we have a proposer and seconder for that, actually?
Councillor Ingham and Councillor Bailey was the second.
Yep. Councillors Ingham and Bailey, and you're happy with that? Yep. Okay, in that case, we can go to vote. All in favour? Okay.
Is that
Yeah. Any against?
Yeah.
And any abstentions?
That's unanimous.
No, that's unanimous then. Okay. Well, we've yeah, slightly longer than most of us envisaged, Marcus. Thank you. Thanks for staying. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 9. I'm going to be really, really firm with how many speakers we have, and if we could keep it brief. Thanks, Ian. We'll look at the response to the government consultation on plan-making reforms, which is on page 88 of your agenda. Over to Mr. Freeman for his report on that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I'll try and be brief as well. So this is our typical format response to government consultations, whereby we basically set out a brief summary of the proposed changes, set out in bold the question that's set in the consultation, and a brief response that we propose to submit on behalf of East Devon District Council in response to the consultation. This consultation is basically on changes to the local plan making system. So if we continue to progress the local plan under the current system, these are issues we won't potentially have to contend with until the next local plan. But it's good to obviously have an eye on what's happening. Essentially, this is all about trying to streamline the plan making process and ensure that it's quicker, that there's more standardisation, better use of digital tools, more open and more consultation, although I'm not sure that really comes through in the proposals, if I'm honest, and standardisation, so standard forms and templates for documents, really. So just going through some of the key issues, I mean, it talks about the importance of having a vision and that this be the golden thread through the entire local plan. So good job we had our visioning workshop a few weeks ago in terms of the current plan, and that it sets out measurable outcomes for the plan period and is supported by a key diagram. It talks about, which I think we mentioned before, the creation of national development management policies. So the government's still very keen on pursuing that, it seems. I think we did raise some concerns in a previous consultation about whether or not that would give us the opportunity to have locally specific development management policies, and hopefully they're listening, because I think many people have made that point. It does talk about the ability to have local policies where they're genuinely local, but I think we'll have to see what comes forward in terms of the national development management policies. But if you look at the draft local plan, there's a good 100 pages of development management policies, so it potentially wipes out quite a lot of the plan. Not necessarily that much work, I would suggest, though, in terms that a lot of these policies are obviously tweaked and amended from previous plans, and so I'm not sure it's going to speed things up that much. Certainly interesting to explore digital technologies and how that can be used in templates, so I think that's an interesting suggestion. The 30-month plan time frame is an interesting one, in that I don't think anyone in the profession is convinced that's possible when you look at the current timescales with the average local plan, I think taking around 7 years at the moment. So that's quite a drop from 7 years to 2.5 years. And then if you go further through the consultation, it talks about, once they reach examination stage, limited opportunities for the inspector to sort of press pause on the examination process, with them only being able to press pause for a period of up to 6 months. Long-standing members will recall that the now adopted local plan was held in examination and held in abeyance for about 18 months while we did additional work. So if we were to apply these timescales to that local plan, it would probably have been found unsound, and we'd have probably been sent back to the starting blocks to start again. So there is some concern, and I hope that comes through in our comments about how achievable that 30-month timescale is, and what some of the unintended outcomes of this might be. If the intention is to get plans in place more quickly, it could have the opposite effect. If we speed through to get a plan to examination, the examination then identifies some issues that need to be addressed, but we've only got 6 months to address them, otherwise the plan's potentially going to be found unsound. And then we go back to the starting blocks. So I think that needs to be addressed. Certainly, I think we would all welcome the comments about community engagement and consultation. Whether this addresses the challenge of trying to engage people in plan making when people are very much more engaged in the application process, when there are specific proposals that directly affect them. I think people struggle to get engaged in the strategic issues we're dealing with at local plan stage, and I'm not sure how what's in this actually would address that. Then finally, I mean, the other, I think, key thing to pick up on is supplementary plans, which is chapter 11 of the consultation. These are developing into something quite different from supplementary planning documents that we've got at the moment. It talks about them being very much for a defined geographically defined, so relating to a specific site or two or more nearby sites, whereas currently, you know, we've got supplementary planning documents that relate to affordable housing, for example, across the whole district. Rather suggest we wouldn't be able to have that in the future. That perhaps just takes the form then of guidance that's published on our website rather than a formalised document. There could be issues relating to that. But it does open up the opportunity for them to perhaps carry more weight and literally be an appendix to the local plan where further allocations could take place, which you can't currently do in a supplementary planning document. So there could be some benefits from that, but there could be some downsides in terms of the current supplementary planning documents, which provide additional guidance to the application of policies within the existing local plan, an extra level of detail that it might be more challenging to produce and give as much weight to in future. It may be that it's more just a case of publishing guidance on our website. And finally, is chapter 13 on community land auctions, which is quite an interesting opportunity to potentially capture more value out of land. It's quite complicated, but I think it basically talks about a process of them piloting an option whereby landowners, when they put forward sites for allocation through the local plan, where the local planning authority basically acquires an option on that land and therefore sort of takes control of its delivery, and that option can then be sold on or taken forward by the local planning authority if the site is allocated for them to develop, or effectively identify who would develop it by selling that option on. It raises some interesting questions, I think, about how you balance the opportunity to maximise value and funding for infrastructure versus assessing the suitability of a site on more sort of traditional planning grounds. How you balance those in terms of assessing sites and how the community land auctions would actually work. But I think, as is reflected in the comments, we've obviously seen lots of issues in terms of capturing land value and funding of infrastructure. Particularly the Cranbrook example is cited there, and so anything that's a potential thing that could be trialled to address those issues and capture more value out of development and give more knowledge and certainty about land values at the allocation stage, I think is worth pursuing and looking at, and at least trialling, to see if it makes a difference in terms of what can be achieved and ensure the timely delivery of infrastructure. So I'll stop there. I think those are the key issues I would draw out, but there's a huge amount in the consultation, as you'll see, and lots of comments to be made. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've got a couple of speakers. Yeah, Councillor Levine and Councillor Olive. Anybody else? Oh, actually, I'll go to Jeff from outside the committee first, and then I'll come to you, Marion. Okay, thank you. And Councillor Rickson.
Page 111, talking about the detail of metrics, it says delivery of 10% biodiversity net gain. I believe the figure is 20%. That has been agreed.
I think we have. I think the government only required 10%, but we had the flexibility to raise that to 20, which we took advantage of in our proposed local plan. But I'll get Ed to comment on that, but I understand that's not affected. Okay, and coming into committee, Councillor Levine.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to stick my neck out. I've been through the document backwards and forwards, and all I've got here to the answers to response to the question. Good answer, good point. I'm not trying to sound sycophantic, Ed, but I found that the replies in the thing good. I've got lots of questions about the whole thing, but it's I don't believe the government will deliver all this digitalization and things. The CLA is a problem, but the answers that we've given are good, to the point, and personally, I'd say I'm quite happy to propose that we adopt.
Second that, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ingham, did you want to say anything more? No? Okay, Councillor Olive.
Thank you, Chair. I've been upstaged, so I have no further comments.
I think this is to do with blood sugar levels rather than the questions the government is asking. Okay, in that case, if we've no further speakers and we're all happy with the responses Ed has made, did you want to come back on Jeff's point about the AONBs?
Yes, I mean, I think the consultation is talking about statutory undertakers, which doesn't include the AONB teams. Doesn't mean that we can't engage with them, and obviously would, but in terms of the requirements of the legislation, they're not statutory consultees, so that's why they've not been included in terms of that. In terms of Councillor Rickson's point, the Chair is correct. The national requirement is 10% biodiversity net gain. At the moment, the draft local plan proposes 20%, which is up to us to suggest, but we obviously need to prove our case through the examination process if that's what we're proposing. Just while we're talking about biodiversity net gain, if members haven't seen, the implementation of biodiversity net gain has actually been delayed. It was due to come in, I think, at the end of this month. It's now been delayed to the new year. And that's major applications only to start with. It's gradually phasing in to the smaller developments later on, but just so members are aware that that's actually been delayed by the government now.
Okay, and we would still retain that flexibility to set our own level.
Well, through the new local plan, we can.
Yeah.
But obviously, we won't start with being in a position of being able to apply that because the new local plan can't carry significant weight yet. So when it does come in the new year, we would only be able to apply the 10% to start with until the new local plan can carry sufficient weight where we can say, actually, our requirement is 20%.
Yeah.
Provided that's allowed by an inspector.
Assuming we can get that through an inspector and found sound in the plan. Assuming it makes it through the further stages of consultation on the plan and the viability assessment and everything else. Still some way to go on that.
Okay. I mean, I think that there are some merits to a more streamlined and possibly more standardised planning system, but I think you've identified some of the dangers in there as well. So, if we've got no further speakers and everybody's happy to accept what Ed has written, we can go to a vote. Damien, yeah?
Has anybody actually proposed it and seconded the recommendation?
I think we did, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that bit.
Yeah, Councillor Levine proposed and Councillor Ingham seconded. Yep.
So, thank you. So, yeah, we can go to the vote then. Thank you very much. All those in favour? Unanimous?
Unanimous.
Yep. It's 11, isn't it?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And I think that concludes our meeting. We have now written the letter that was asked for in the last meeting. So we'll probably, well, I'm happy with it. Was anything, but otherwise, shall we circulate it to members? If Mike and I are both happy. I thought it was excellent, Ed. I thought you missed your vocation, really. I thought you should have been a politician. But I think it's quite a strongly worded letter, actually. I think you'll be quite pleased with it. And there was something else that suddenly occurred to me that I thought, oh, yes, we need to hear about that again, but I can't remember what it was, so I'll get back to you on that one, Ed. Okay, thank you all for your attendance. Thank you for some good quality of debate, lots of excellent points made, and some good compromises reached. So thank you very much. I declare the meeting closed.
All right.